Good afternoon, everyone. Kwei. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate in your first ever national forum on First Nations policing. I would like to start by acknowledging that I am on the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. The RCMP honors all First Nations people and values their present and their past contributions to this land. And I would like to thank the Assembly of First Nations Executive for inviting me to speak today. Throughout our history, whether it's been fulfilling our mandate to enforce federal, provincial, territorial, municipal laws and policies, or through systemically racist institutional decisions, the RCMP has taken actions that have obviously eroded First Nations people's trust. And some of these actions have left generational scars. I know that we're just at the beginning of a very long journey, and rebuilding the trust and strengthening that respectful relationship is going to take time. However, I have to tell you that I am completely committed to reconciliation, both as an individual and as the commissioner of the RCMP. And I think building trust is a shared journey, but it's also bigger than words. We have to show actions, and we have to work hard together to build and maintain relationships based on trust. I have been engaging National First Nations, Inuit, and Métis leaders, and we are formalizing working relationships that will strengthen not only information sharing, but also how we engage in a more meaningful way with Indigenous partners on the way we do our work. And I really honestly believe that it's so important that we consult with those that are most impacted by the decisions that we're making. So we are listening and taking positive action. And this is reflected in our Vision 150 plan, which is actually on our website. You can see all the tracking of that. And it's a plan to modernize the RCMP, which puts people first so that we can provide the communities with the best service possible. We're focused on thoughtful action based on what we've been hearing in conversations with advisory groups, Indigenous communities, and Indigenous employees. As part of our plan, the RCMP in each province and territory are using a trauma-informed approach to co-develop reconciliation strategies with the stakeholders in the communities, the employees, and the advocates. And I am so deeply grateful for the guidance that's been provided by First Nations, Métis, and Inuit elders and knowledge keepers from across the country. Their openness, honesty, and passion have really helped us develop meaningful courses that are advancing our cultural learning strategy. We have courses such as the Cultural Awareness and Humility course, and using a trauma-informed approach, and they're providing a solid foundation prior to a series of new courses, including anti-racism training and schools and community-specific Indigenous courses through the Canada School of Public Service. The RCMP is better for those relationships that we've built together and to advance our learning and deepen our understanding of the variety and the richness of Indigenous cultures. But you know, learning is really just one step on the path to that reconciliation. We have a new Indigenous lived experience advisory group, which is now providing us with advice on how to advance reconciliation and address systemic racism issues. We're partnering with Indigenous women's groups, initiating an equity, diversity, and inclusion strategy. And we are now in the midst of formalizing a brand new office for RCMP Indigenous collaboration, co-development, and accountability, which will go a long way to getting people's views across the country on how we could do better. As an institution of the government, we acknowledge that the RCMP is obviously part of social structures and systems that have perpetuated racism in Canada. And we know that we have enforced racist and discriminatory legislation and policies. In 2018, at the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, I did acknowledge that the RCMP was not the police force needed by families and promised to do better. The RCMP is a policing organization that has to be reflective of today's Canada and Canadian values, and we are committed to modernizing and transforming and making important changes to our culture and management practices. Over the past year, my senior leadership team has engaged with dozens of stakeholders, including the Assembly of First Nations, Indigenous women's groups, the Federal Black Employee Caucus, and key Indigenous leaders like Senator Murray Sinclair to identify initiatives and priorities. And again, it's talking with people who are most impacted by what we do going forward. Our response is to the issues surrounding systemic racism and discrimination is really a key component of our Vision 150 modernization strategy. We are, for example, we're undertaking research and engaging key stakeholders, experts, and employees to support the implementation tools for the collection of disaggregated race-based data on police interactions with racialized and Indigenous people. And this will help us going forward, making those evidence-based decisions. This information will support that evidence-based assessment and update of our RCMP policies, our processes, our practices to address systemic racism and other forms of discrimination. As part of our ongoing efforts to be more accountable to the communities we serve, we have started publishing police information on our website. So this does include the intervention or use of force information, mental health calls for service, and employee equity and diversity data. We are further emphasizing and exposing our police officers to crisis intervention and de-escalation techniques in training, and its mandatory recertification each and every year. We're developing training and policy with stakeholders to best address resource protests and other major events that provide police officers with the skills and the abilities that they require to take a measured approach, using alternative dispute resolution techniques to resolve conflict effectively between parties. Our training materials are being modernized to reflect the latest developments in policing trends and research, and this includes continuous evaluation of police intervention training to ensure it's meaningful. It has to be credible, it has to be defendable, and it has to be informed by research. I've also launched, for the first time ever, ongoing national dialogue with Canadian police chiefs and looking at collaboratively re-examining our current de-escalation frameworks towards a refreshed model, so it is one model across the entire country, one that's developed in consultation with the policing community and its specific groups, including those representing racialized and Indigenous people. We're also examining calls to mental health and making sure that we are sharing best practices and using the best approach with the best results. The RCMP shares your concerns regarding unacceptably high rates of the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in criminal justice system. And through engagement and collaboration, we really are committed to working to address this. Part of our focus is to increase our referrals to restorative justice programs, especially in that pre-charge space. We've been pretty good at the post-charge space, but we haven't been in the pre-charge space. And it's making sure those individuals do not get into the system in the first place. Our Vision 150 modernization efforts also include ensuring transparent oversight of serious incidents and strengthening timelines in our public complaint process. And the National Chief referred to this. We're not afraid of oversight. We're not afraid of providing responses to oversight or following recommendations. And so we have to make sure that those timelines are tightened up because people deserve timely and transparent responses. Partnerships and collaborative problem solving help ensure initiatives are community driven, they're community paced, community culturally sensitive, and community led. So, you know, we used to have multiple different ways of policing, and then we got away from tiered policing. We have to ensure that policing models reflect the philosophy and that meet the needs of the communities. And we've seen that, and I think I saw on your agenda the presentation on Quanlin Dunn, and that's just a great example that working together we can provide the best possible policing to those communities. We're working to bring body-worn cameras to frontline police officers across Canada, and part of that work includes a current pilot project in Iqaluit that will shape our policies and our procedures going forward in regards to body-worn cameras. And this is just part of the RCMP's ongoing work towards building trust, building trusting relationships, and delivering responsive, culturally aware, and trauma-informed policing services for Indigenous communities later this month. And across Canada, sorry. Later this month, we'll be sharing our first national report on reconciliation. The report will be a reflection of the RCMP's collaborative and community-driven approach towards establishing and maintaining mutually respectful relations with Indigenous people in Canada. And it really does showcase nationally, provincially, and territorial community and in community engagement activities that are strengthening relationships with our Indigenous communities. It highlights RCMP initiatives that address the advancement of reconciliation, the MMIWG calls for justice, reclaiming power and place, the final report on the National Inquiry into the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls, recognizing that the way forward is not a series of checkboxes. It must be done in collaboration with Indigenous communities, people, and employees of the RCMP. Violence against Indigenous women, girls, Two-Spirited, and the LGBTQ1A plus people in Canada is an ongoing national tragedy. The RCMP is committed to improving relationships with Indigenous communities and supporting survivors and families and ensuring that investigations are robust, professional, and result in justice for the victims and their families, and having that better communication with families during that horrific process. Recognizing that the work of reconciliation is long-term and requires many participants, in the coming year, the RCMP will continue working with partners to advance specific policies, procedures, and processes that will further close those policing gaps identified in the MMIWG calls for justice. We know there is still much more work to be done, but you have my word. I remain focused on advancing reconciliation as part of my mandate of modernizing the RCMP. Thank you so much for your continued partnership as we move forward on the RCMP path of reconciliation. I look forward to how your forum progresses today, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you, Miigwech.